How's it going, man? It's been a while.
It's good. It has been a while. I mean, we've talked behind the scenes more, but yeah,
That's
a
true.
lot happened here. A lot
A
happened
lot
in
has happened.
Eastern Carolina, and yeah,
Yeah, because last time we had a conversation was before the election. You were still stumping for Harris and Biden, weren't you?
I was.
How you
Poor
feeling now?
Harris. Not so great.
I
Not
hate
so
to say
great.
I told you so, but I told you so. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no, you did.
Um,
You did.
yeah,
You
I
you
said,
had some bad takes though. I was I was seeing your
hey, my
takes on
my
the.
bad takes might be bad, but they were right.
I think your
They were
post
accurate takes.
regarding the election, I saw what you wrote on the day of the election or the day after. You did like a post
Yeah,
analysis of why the Democrats lost. I definitely disagreed with almost everything you said.
really
and
interesting.
and in your
We should
your
talk
stream
about
with
that.
Natalie that you
Mm.
did the day of the election, I disagreed with you there too.
So you
I
think the Democrats need to be moderates?
No, I don't think the Democrats need to be moderates. I think one of the things that
Well, that was one
yeah,
of my central takes, though, that the Democrats need to stop being so kind of afraid of what they actually believe in.
yeah, my take is that the Democrats didn't do that bad. That's my opinion. I think they
Uh,
lost the election because the electorate lost. I mean, I don't know. Like that's my take. I thought, in my opinion, I thought Kamala ran a pretty good campaign. Um, I know you disagree. There's definitely going to be points of disagreement, but I think the electorate just made a stupid choice. And sometimes, to me, sometimes it's as simple as that.
yeah, the
Um,
people are just wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I know that's gonna offend
True
some
man
people.
against the people. Jeremy
Yeah.
Loeb, the man against the people.
Yeah,
We
we should
need
have
you
had
to
this
lead.
we should have had this talk, like, sooner,
Yeah.
when it's more topical, but, yeah, Trump is gonna take office pretty soon, so he's gonna be sworn in.
Well,
And then buckle
here's
your
one
seatbelts,
thing.
folks.
Yeah, we'll see how things go. But one thing that is probably more depressing than what happened on election day is what's been happening over the last few weeks with all these killings. And I wanted to have you on because I thought it'd be a good conversation between two guys about why there's so many guys all over the country and frankly all over the world who seem to be killing people, frankly. And um, we're going to walk through and discuss some of these specific cases and try and unravel what happened. I mean, to the extent we can unravel it. And I know you know a little bit about the New Orleans case. You've been looking at that a little bit, reading about it. I've looked into that too, but I've looked at some of these other cases too, including this guy who blew up his Cybertruck outside of Trump's hotel in Las Vegas.
Mhm.
Really interesting. But
Yeah.
to give everyone a preview, one of the neglected, in fact, I think the most important neglected reason that angry men are killing so many people is because of what we do to animals. Um, I think fundamentally, well, really two things. One is when we create a culture of killing, inevitably, that killing is not just extend to the most vulnerable; it extends to everybody. Because if you think you're entitled to kill one class of beings, you will kill others too. And this is just social scientific research. We know this. But there's a more fundamental problem, which is that when the system shows to you that it's not worth trusting because vulnerable beings are being exploited and tortured, and when the system proves to you when you're vulnerable that you're not going to be treated well, you're not going to be respected, you're not going to be cared for, you're not going to be heard, you're not going to be wanted by your society, then inevitably people will lash out. And the only way for us to show that the system will truly care for everyone is for us to care for those who have no power, which is animals. So that's kind of where I'd like to go with this and try and unpack how a society that really embraced animal rights could actually have stopped all these mass killings, very concretely. But let's start with what exactly happened. So
Well,
it sounds
before
like you
you
read a little bit about New Orleans.
well, and the reason why I looked into New Orleans, and, I kinda tune out these
Mm,
days, because it's just so grim, like, it'll just
yeah.
wear you down. But I looked into New Orleans, as we mentioned, you had that conversation with Natalie. Natalie's a New Orleans-based activist. We're talking about Natalie Fulton, and
Hmm.
my instant thought was, she used to do all this street activism on the streets on Bourbon Street, and that's where this
Really?
killing took place. So I was instantly
Wow.
thinking, oh, I hope she wasn't out there. Went to her social media and she had been posting. So she was fine, thank God. But
Yeah. Yeah,
but
you're
yeah,
making
that
me think. I've got another friend who's based in New Orleans. I should probably check in with.
New Orleans been the scene of some heat. Um,
Yeah,
so I know like Curtis had a gun pulled on him. They were
I
doing
know.
activism there, and so yeah. But to your point, like before we get into the specifics, I just want to agree because I think, and like you can go back to like the earliest days of the animal rights movement. You can go like to Gary Yourofsky, making the point that speciesism is the earliest form of discrimination that we're taught as children. Love the dog, eat the pig. And in a world where we didn't teach people that, it would be much harder, in my opinion, to hate one another as people because we're taught to love everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, it's a theory. It sounds good to me, but we can
Yeah.
unpack it.
Yeah, we will unpack it because I think it's not just a theory at this point. There's a lot of evidence for it that inequality, and I have a series of hypotheses I think we should discuss as to why angry men are killing people. But one of them is inequality, and there's a lot of evidence that inequality leads to violence. It's almost just one of the rules of human civilization that the more unequal civilization is, the more likely it is going to cause violence. But let's talk about some of these cases a little bit. So the gentleman who killed, I think it's up to 15 people now have been killed. Is it 15?
Yeah.
I believe it's 15. Someone by the name of Shamsuddin Jabbar, who's an American citizen from Texas, an Army veteran who worked in information technology and had no criminal record at all. And if you've seen some of the video footage, and we won't show the video footage in this podcast because everyone's seen this, but I mean, have you seen some of the surveillance photos of this truck going to Bourbon Street? It's absolutely terrifying.
I have not. Yeah, as soon as I learned that Natalie was fine, I kind of just tuned out.
Yeah, I mean, so one is it's kind of astonishing how easy it was to pull this off, especially since this sort of thing has happened on multiple occasions in many different cities, and even very recently in Europe. I mean, we've had occasions like this where people have just taken trucks in Germany, for example, just a couple days ago. Also another man, Saudi Arabian citizen, apparently. So it's on everyone's radars. And New Year's Eve, Bourbon Street, I mean, New Orleans is one of the biggest party cities in the nation. And yet they apparently, just because of government incompetence, left open a lot of the areas where they should have had barriers. So they've been engaged in this construction project apparently for many years. For some reason, they just can't construct a very simple barrier that prevents cars from driving to Bourbon Street. And so instead, they just had a police car stationed at the entrance to Bourbon Street.
Mm-hmm.
And there's surveillance footage of the dude literally just driving up and then going around the police car and then speeding down Bourbon Street, which it was that easy. And
yeah.
So, and it's just another demonstration of the sheer incompetence. And frankly, it's the incompetence of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has failed people over and over again.
Wait.
I'm serious. I mean, the Democratic Party has been a complete
Party?
failure. And this is one of the instances. Yeah, it's New Orleans. New Orleans is a Democratic city, Democratic governance. And over again, the Democratic Party has failed. And I think this is one of those instances. And you might think, just come on, this is a stretch. Well, no. I mean, look, the Democratic Party in California has failed on housing. It's failed on agriculture. It's failed on animals. It's failed on everything. They just can't get anything done. Even when American values are very clear. We don't want people to be murdered. We don't want people to be homeless. We don't want people dying of drugs. We don't want people to be depressed and lonely. We certainly don't want animals to be tortured. The Democratic Party, I mean, the Republican Party too. But in many ways, the Democratic Party has been worse than the Republican Party.
Well, listen, and it's like, let me make one point. So when you say the Republican Party does this too, then it's not the Democratic Party. It's just everyone. It's society. Like that's kind of where I differ from you a little bit. Because I think when you bring up the Democratic Party and then you say the Republican Party, then that to me just says it's happening.
Well, to me, one of the big differences is because the Democratic Party is the party that is known for trying to help more vulnerable people. That is the ethos of the Democratic Party. It's kind of like Whole Foods, right? It's pretending to be something different, and it's even more insidious because, Trump doesn't pretend to care about vulnerable peoples. I mean, he wants to kick them out of the country. He wants to throw them in jail. He just likes anyone who's not rich and powerful like him. I mean, there's an argument that Trump cares about working class Americans. I don't buy it. I don't think Trump actually believes that. I don't think his rhetoric shows that. In contrast, when you listen to Harris or Biden, they talk a reasonably good talk. They talk about how they care about the climate. They talk about how they care about police brutality. And then over and over again, when it comes to actually delivering, they do the opposite, which is extremely dangerous, because part of the reason I think you saw in many ways much less progress from 2020 to 2024 on key issues that I care about, like climate justice, animal rights, than you saw from 2016 to 2020 is because people were just deluded into thinking things were okay. They're riding with Biden. They thought like, oh, good, Harris is here. Harris to the rescue. Harris the hero. And it's like, Harris has done almost nothing for the most important existential crises facing the planet Earth. And it's worse than that. It's not only that she's done nothing, she actually has endorsed many policies that threaten all of us, including massive subsidies to animal agriculture. So, I mean, Trump was the first offender in this. He increased subsidies to animal agriculture by like 2 to 3x when he came into office. Biden kept them in place and gave just as much out to big ag over the last 4 years as Trump did in his 4 years. Fracking and fossil fuel production. Fossil fuel production domestically actually increased under Biden. Most people don't know this. If you care about climate change, if you're concerned about the skies turning red and the planet being destroyed by a shutdown of the Gulf Stream, that thermal handling system, catastrophic climate change that kills us all, the hurricanes, the extreme weather, the extreme heat, then Kamala Harris has been compromising your future, if you believe in that. And there's this kind of, I'm drafting this article for a magazine that's being published, and there's this hilarious article that I cite in this piece. I don't want to say what it is yet because it hasn't been published yet. I'll just make sure it gets out. There's this hilarious article about climate activists rejoicing about Kamala Harris. And so you have all these quotes from these climate nonprofits like the NRDC and even the Sunrise Movement. The Sunrise Movement is known for doing direct action to support the climate justice movement. And they're all celebrating and excited. And then in the second half of the article, it says, and by the way, Kamala Harris now has reversed herself and fully supports fracking. And it's like, wait a minute. Yeah. I thought we were against fracking. I thought that was our position. I thought we were against fossil fuel production. And suddenly, just because Harris says, like, don't worry, I'm pro-climate, I'm woke, she can take exactly the same positions that Trump takes. And in fact, she not only that, she's trying to out-Trump Trump. She was saying, like, I'm the one who's really pro-fracking. I'm the one on immigration. She was saying, I'm the one who wants to really deport everyone. Don't you realize I had the border security bill that was going to deport all these illegal immigrants? So don't believe Trump, believe me. And it's like, does it matter anymore what people actually do? And I think it does in the long term. Like in the short term, I think a lot of times people are tricked. But the problem is in the long term, people see through this shit. And they realize when Harris says she's more compassionate and her administration supports Prop 12 and decides we don't care about stuffing mother pigs in the gestation crates, which are these 2x7 metal tombs that these poor mother pigs live in for their entire adult lives, they realize, oh, maybe I shouldn't trust you. So,
well, couple points on that. So I remember I was in the airport, had an overnight flight, and so I used that time to listen to the interview that you did with Jeremy Beckham, and these were some of the points that you were hitting, and a lot of what you said I disagreed with, and including what you kind of just alluded to, like saying Kamala, and by the way, I felt like at the time, back when you had that conversation with Jeremy, we had some of these discussions behind the scene where I expressed, actually we had it on your podcast where I said, look, I think it's kind of irresponsible because I don't want to discourage people from voting. I still feel that way. And that's why, honestly, I feel like it's a little like election's over. So I feel like a little more open to discuss, but
nice.
Because, well,
now we can really get into it.
Well, we can. And I think there are fair points, but I think to say that Kamala Harris, and Joe Biden, or the opposite, doing the opposite of climate progress, I think to some extent you're right, because the Democrats and everybody are wrong on animal rights issues. And we know that animal agriculture is one of the top contributors to climate change. So we know that. So they dropped the ball on that. They reversed their progress, but they did pass that one piece of legislation that was touted at the time as
the Inflation Reduction Act.
The big investment in climate action, which is pathetic. I mean, it's pathetic that that's the biggest investment that we've ever had in climate action, but I think it was. So the other thing is that
mostly on hand-me-outs to people like Elon Musk, frankly. That's what the
Okay.
Inflation
Well,
Reduction Act
yeah.
basically did. I mean, it was just a handout to big business that's doing kind of renewable energy. It wasn't about actually holding fossil
Yeah.
fuels accountable. I mean, again, they record levels of domestic fossil fuel production under Joe Biden.
Yeah. And
How do you argue with that?
well, the way I argue with that, I don't like it. Let me just make that clear. But I do know that too, most mainstream Democrats and that they feel that fracking could be a bridge to renewable energy. It's a very commonly held belief. I think it's bullshit. You know it's bullshit. Methane is far worse for the environment than carbon emission, like carbon dioxide emissions. So it's bullshit. But they're just behind. Again, we sort of talked about this. It's unfortunate. I think the real danger of someone like Trump is not the 4 years that he's going to be in office. Those are dangerous enough. The first year is going to be extremely dangerous when he has the actual power. I think he's going to lose Congress soon. Anyway, but the first year is going to be dangerous. The danger is the judges. You're electing who's going to preside over your cases for decades to come.
Because the Democratic judges have done so well for us.
Fair point.
You are talking to the wrong buddy. You are talking to the wrong man, my friend. If you're going to try and make a pitch for Democratic judges,
well, listen. And in your conversation with Jermey, didn't he say? He said, "Look, when we're arguing a case, we want those kinds of judges more." And look, like even in Wisconsin, when we had that one judge, it seemed pretty good, right? True. You know, like
and we still might get a good outcome in the special prosecutor petition. We're waiting, and
Well, again,
I mean, look, I don't want to get too far in this direction because I mean, the thing I wanted to talk. Sorry to interrupt you, but
no, it's okay.
I think this is like a really interesting conversation, and but I want to have it in the context of the specific issue that's on a lot of people's minds right now, which is why are people killing each other, right? Why are so many angry men killing people? And the reason I brought up the Democrats is I think part of it is because the powers that be have deservedly lost people's trust. And frankly, while, I mean, you can't say that, you know, the person who's most blameworthy for the murders that happened, for the atrocity that happened in New Orleans, is the guy who actually committed the atrocity. There's something eerily poignant about the fact that part of the reason he was able to do that was because of a basic failure in the Democratic Party to do the things that people are asking them to do. Even a simple thing like, hey, we're going to have this party on Bourbon Street. Do you think you could kind of like put up some protection for us? And what happens is with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, if you are powerful, wealthy, they listen to you. And if you're not, if you're an ordinary person, if you're just like a passerby on the street, if you're a tourist, if you're a homeless person, if you're an animal, if you're an inmate, if you're anyone other than Elon Musk, they don't care. They just don't care. Yeah. And one of the ways they don't care is they don't set up protection because you know what? It's not the Elon Musk of the world who are partying on a random street on Bourbon Street in New Orleans. Right. He's in Mar-a-Lago in a highly secured compound with his, I think it's like $20 million security detail around him. It doesn't matter to him if there's, some occlusions on Bourbon Street to protect ordinary people. It matters to people who don't have power and don't have the ability to influence our political system, including the Democratic Party. But the other thing about this dude that's interesting is this is someone who is an Army veteran who served this country. And, I mean, whatever you think about the American military, I don't think super highly of it. Not because I think the individuals involved are bad, but because the American military has been involved in multiple atrocities, has committed war crimes over and over again. And I still think there's been no accountability. I mean, if you look at what happened with Iraq and Afghanistan, there's been like virtually no accountability for the war crimes the Americans have committed over the last, 20 years. But whatever you think of the American military, certainly as a society, we've made a collective commitment to supporting people serving the military, right? They are sacrificing, they're risking themselves in significant ways. And this guy's life was in complete shambles. Mm-hmm. So one thing that I read that was particularly interesting is he said, like, the military built into me a culture, even including the acronyms I use, the way I talk, that I'm confused back in ordinary society. And I've heard this from many people who are in the military, that when you come back from these like war zones, you come back in a society, because one of our mutual friends, actually, do you know Rob Doroff?
Yeah.
So he's a psychiatrist at UCSF. He's a professor of psychiatry, and he works primarily with military veterans. And he's told me some stories about how just traumatized and broken a lot of these people are. And especially people who are broken because they sacrifice something to the community should be supported. And yet, when you look around the country, you know, at the 100,000 people dying every year from deaths of despair, fentanyl deaths, suicide, you know, alcohol poisoning because they drink themselves to death, there's like shocking percentage of these people are former military people, right?
Oh yeah.
It's terrifying. And that is a demonstration of kind of how much we failed. People are vulnerable in this society, even people who I think almost everyone agree deserves our society's support because they've sacrificed, in some cases, risking their lives for all of us. And yet, instead of getting the support they deserve, too often they're abandoned. They're not given health care. They're in financial ruin. And this dude, I think in like the years before this incident happened, before he converted to radical Islam, he was on the brink of losing his home. He had racked up $16,000 in credit card debt, from what I read. And credit card debt, for those of you who don't experience this and haven't experienced this, it is the worst debt in the world because when you have an interest rate of like 18%, it's like you just can't pay it off. You can't pay it off. It keeps growing and growing. And no matter how much you put into the system to paying it off, and these credit card companies make a killing on this. And this is actually another area where the Democratic Party has failed America, you know, because we've known these are predatory credit rates. These are predatory interest rates, basically since credit card companies were invented decades ago, since like the 1970s or 80s, when credit cards became just a very common thing across the country. We've known these are interest rates that basically exploit vulnerable Americans and keep them financially trapped for the rest of their lives. And yet for decades, because of the power of the financial industry to manipulate the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, we've never passed laws protecting ordinary consumers from this sort of debt. And that's kind of what happened to this dude.
Yeah, well, I don't want to keep doing the Democrat thing, but I do want to say though that I understand going harder on the Democrats because they purport to be about something, and it's also like more people on our circle would probably, I guess, more mine. A lot of people are like sort of apolitical or something in our circle. I think they're just so disenchanted with it, but probably more lean left is what. So it's like me going after NPR because I expect better from them. I don't expect Fox News to, you know, cover animal rights issues. I expect NPR to, but they all should. So yeah, I understand like why you go hard. You've also had personal experience with it. But yeah, I mean, to take this back to the animals, like, again, you've made this point already, but yeah, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, all of society has failed animals completely, just completely and utterly failed. And it's hard to find, you know, like areas where we can feel optimistic. I mean, that's one of the reasons I work with you. I get a sense of optimism, like we're actually doing something about it. With regards to these people going around killing people, yeah, you never want to say it's understandable because obviously that it's such a far stretch, but it's understandable why people feel disenchanted with the world that we live in when our world is filled with suffering and torture and death. And I want to point, we should focus on men, I think, but there was that recent shooting. We should point out that it was a young girl who shot up the school too. I believe that was more of an outlier though. But yeah, it's
very rare
happened
for women to do this.
Yeah, I think men are more prone to violence. I don't know why. It's just part of our nature.
Testosterone.
Yeah,
it's probably the culture too. But testosterone plays a nasty role in violence.
Definitely the culture. I mean, you know, it's interesting. They every time there's like a shooting or something, it used to be that they would always bring up video games. And I mean, one of the things that I've been looking at lately is like how it would be cool if video games, where so many young men are just playing video games, were like we had some games that were focused on animal rights. All these guys sneaking around, you know, doing like stealth missions. Wayne Hsiung could be a character.
Metal Gear Solid.
I would like to take control of you, Wayne.
Nice. Secret's out though. Maybe you do control me. Maybe that's what this is all about.
Yeah.
We're finally outing the real power behind the animal rights movement, Jermey Loeb.
I wish.
Yeah. So, I mean, what do you think caused this guy to snap based on what you've seen?
Well, I mean, there's religious extremism, obviously, but
Hmm.
why people are driven to religious extremism is probably the things that we've diagnosed, I think, before, which is basically just the male isolation.
Hmm.
It could just get back to loneliness, being rejected, sex. I,
Hmm.
like guys like becoming too focused on their online life rather than getting out and talking to people, which is kind of a point about like activism. Activism is kind of a leap of faith. You've got to do things you're uncomfortable with. Well, talking to a girl sometimes is uncomfortable. Getting
Comfortable. Yeah.
rejected is uncomfortable. And I think a lot of men just can't handle it.
Yeah.
For some reason. Like I think the biggest problem with young men seems to be that they can't handle rejection. And I
Hmm.
know I've been rejected many times. It hurts. It sucks.
Yeah.
I know you love it. We had that discussion. You
I
made
don't
it a
love it.
game.
I love how much I hate it. I hate
Yeah.
it so much. I love it
Yeah.
much. I hate it.
Yeah. But I think that's part of it. But when we speak societally, Democratic Party, Republican Party, they fail. Look, they just
Yeah.
fail. We know that. Our
Yeah.
entire system fails. And I agree that dismantling animal agriculture would be one, not the only thing that would fix it, but one of
Yeah.
many and one of the main
Yeah. And
ones.
it's not a direct effect either. I mean, I think people are probably listening. Oh, come on. You really think dismantling animal agriculture is going to stop mass murders? Are you out of your minds? It's that a system and a society that respects vulnerable beings enough to defend even those who are most vulnerable will also, almost by logical extension, provide support for people like this dude.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about isolation and vulnerability. And again, not to excuse what he did, but this guy's life sounded like it sucked. Because you were talking about loneliness, lack of sex, all these things that drive men completely insane. And for the record, I mean, I've been sexless for many, many years in my life, and I have not gone insane. It's okay, guys. You can go
Yeah.
without sex for many years, and you're fine. It's
Same.
one of the reasons,
It's fine.
one of the reasons I have no problems of going to prison for a little while is because I'm very confident I'll be fine. But and for women too, I mean, I can't speak for women or non-binary people, but I promise you, it is okay. You can survive. Honestly, even when I was in jail, like I didn't even think about sex really. It's kind of
Well,
weird because you're mostly thinking about just like getting through the day,
yeah. I
and there's so much.
imagine. I mean,
Yeah, there's like it's kind of interesting because the fact that you have all these day-to-day challenges that most people don't have, like I am not free and I need to try and get out of this cage, it makes you think less about some of the abstract problems that most Americans and most people around the world think about who are a little more privileged.
well, and you're a
But
straight
this
man. I
dude,
mean, there's no stimulation for you in prison. That's
exactly. So
yeah.
there's nothing that's doing it. But one of the things about this guy that I think is true of almost all the angry men who go out there and kill people, and I think this is even true of just people who kill animals, is intense disconnection and loneliness.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of one of the hypotheses, like why are angry men killing people? One is loneliness for sure. So this guy apparently had basically no connections of anyone at all, was twice divorced, and shortly before he became radicalized by ISIS. And I mean, there's not a lot out there yet about what his actual beliefs were. And it is extremely strange because the guy was born in Texas, was part of the US Army. And like a couple of years ago, there's this video of him talking about his role in property rentals and how he's like learned a lot from being in the army about how to be a good property rental agent. If you need someone to rent out your property, I'm your guy. It's like very
Yeah.
odd to go from there to ISIS extremist. But he was carrying the ISIS black flag. Um, ISIS has claimed credit for the attack. So it sounds like maybe he had some contact of ISIS. It does seem like it was not something planned by ISIS. And for those of you who don't know what ISIS is the Islamic State of Iraq. And what does ISIS stand for, actually? Do you know what
Probably
it stands for?
Syria. But
Yeah, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. That's right. Okay.
I think they just
So,
go
but
by
it's,
Islamic State now.
yeah, I think they just go by the Islamic State. You're right. But one thing about this guy that's interesting is not only did he go through 2 divorces, but near the end of his life, like in the last couple of years, his ex-wife and his ex-wife's new husband actually cut him off even from his daughters. And maybe justifiably so, frankly. I don't know why it was done, but it sounds like he was getting kind of wild. But they've been quoted saying like, yeah, we didn't let him even have contact with his own daughters. You can only imagine what that does to someone, to be so disconnected that even, your own children are no longer in your life. And there was a neighbor of his, like an older lady. He actually sounds like, in many ways, a pretty decent human being until this incident. But she said, like, yeah, I never saw him interact with anybody. You know, it was just like him. And occasionally, but he was very polite, and occasionally he'd help me with my groceries. But he was just one of these loser types, you know, like who just seemed to have no one in his life.
Yeah.
And he had, all he could do is sit at home, like stare at walls. And that does very, very dark things to people of all types, but especially men with testosterone and like that aggression in them. It's scary. And again, not to excuse, not to say that in any way justifies it, but loneliness is one of the most profound causes of this. And this guy's certainly an example of that.
Well, and a good lesson from that is, like you said, if he was posting like very normal seeming like video or whatever, like 2 years ago, it should tell us and inform us that this could be us.
Yeah.
And that's one of the lessons that I think I brought up, like that Zone of Interest movie about the Holocaust, where people were living next to a concentration camp. I know we always get there. Somehow we always get there. But anyway, it's just talking about how, you know, it's warning us that this could be us. Like, so, and it was us, because what we do to animals is this. So, you know, we've all been monsters before. It's just like, who's the victim? A lot of times it's the animal. So we just haven't gotten to the point, like maybe these guys just kind of lose touch, and the humans become the enemies. And it's interesting that we're talking about religious extremists, and animal rights activists are often called extremists and that sort of thing, by trying to stop violence. And it's very seldom, like it has happened. Animal rights activists have been violent in the past. They have done some violent things, but the vast majority of the violence has been inflicted upon them by a public that consumes animals and, you know, abuses animals by, you know, by extension of that. And that just goes back to our original kind of theory that when we treat animals this way, it breeds violence and it extends to violence. And you can just look at slaughterhouse workers who have high rates of like spousal abuse. They're stressed out. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, but to the specific, like, how does this happen? You get isolated. I mean, the antidote is to get out of the house, go meet your neighbor, you know,
adopt a dog. I'm actually serious. Like, if you look at mass killers, as far as I can recall, I think literally zero of them have had companion animals at home. And I'm not saying angry men should necessarily go adopt a dog, because I'm already hearing all the comments like, do you really want these guys adopting dogs? Because, you know, you've mentioned this to me before. There's like there's a real danger. But if we had a society that encouraged and cultivated and even financially supported, instead of the tens of billions of dollars we use to subsidize big ag to roast animals alive, imagine we took those tens of billions of dollars and encouraged and trained and supported people in having healthy relationships with dogs. Because all these kind of weird, awkward, sometimes aggressive guys who are like, I mean, a lot of them, just to be blunt, a lot of them are just complete losers. They're extremely awkward people. You listen to them talk and you're just like, you are a weirdo. You're like literally the least charismatic person. You're like the opposite of charismatic. You're repulsive. You know, you're not good looking. You talk funny. You smell funny. And if there's one thing we know about violence, it's that violence is often bred by people who feel unwanted. This is actually research from, you know, adoption and abortion. So like Steve Levitt, the economist at the University of Chicago, did the famous study showing that abortion leads to this dramatic decrease in crime. And one of the reasons is because a child who's born into a family where they're unwanted, or a human being who's unwanted, who everyone around them is just saying, I don't want you around. You're repulsive. Get away from me. If you're rejected by everyone, you will reject them. And the most violent form of a rejection, obviously, is violence, right? Is to actually kill. And who among us will include and make visible and make wanted the most repulsive human beings than dogs? Like dogs are like the perfectly inclusive species. They do not care how much you smell. They don't care if you talk funny. They don't care if you're fat and ugly and stupid. You can be the most incompetent. Like, one of the amazing things about a dog is that no matter how much you fail, and I know this because I've failed a lot, and I've in some cases been and felt like a loser and just like a complete reject. But every day, no matter how rejected I was at school, when I was growing up, I would come home and my dog would love me as if I was the president of the United States.
Yeah.
She'd be so happy to see me. She'd be literally jumping up and down.
And you tell the story about how the neighbor's dog that you would
absolutely
walk by. Yeah.
Yeah. All the kids, all the little kids in Indianapolis thought I was I was a fat Chinese loser. I was a fat Chinese loser. Well, at least I was a fat Chinese kid with like broken glasses, and they all made fun of me. They rejected me. I was unwanted by that community. Yeah. And the exception was the neighborhood dogs. They loved me. They didn't give a shit that I was fat. They didn't give a shit that I was Chinese. They just knew that I was a sentient being, that I was a human, and they loved me. And imagine if we subsidized that instead of subsidizing warfare and violence and suffering, like factory farms and fossil fuels and wars all over the country. I'm going to lecture you about Ukraine again. Imagine we took the $100 billion we sent to Ukraine to fight wars and we invested in supporting people and yes, maybe supervising them too, because I think there should be some supervision when a dog is placed into a home. There should be supervision, and good rescues do this. Yeah. But helping people like this dude realize, look, maybe my ex-wife hates me. Maybe my kids don't like me anymore. Maybe I have no friends. Maybe everyone in the world thinks I'm a loser. Maybe I'm poor. I can't speak. I'm not attractive. Maybe I have no hope in the human community. But maybe there's a dog out there who will love me. And it's not just maybe. I guarantee you, almost virtually every human being, probably every human being on this earth, not just a dog, almost any dog that you just give the basic respect and dignity that every sentient being deserves. You give them food and water and a little bit of love, they will love you. They will love you to the end of the earth.
Oh, yeah. Well, I just recently was watching a friend's dog for about 10 days when they went on vacation. And you know me, I don't have a dog myself. And so this little Chihuahua that I was watching was very young, very needy. And he was by my side the entire time. And he became my life, for those 10 days. He was, I still miss him, honestly. I grew such a bond with this little pup. And it was just for one, it just requires a lot of your time. So instead of like, if these guys would just be online getting inundated with ISIS propaganda, instead, my dog needs to go pee, or he's going to pee on the floor, and, you just have a lot of responsibility. So there's less time for one. And you also just develop this bond with a creature who is relying on you, as better than anyone. If we let the government be in charge of it, what they would do is create puppy mills, though. And give everybody a puppy instead of
including the Democrats.
Including the Democrats. Yes.
Just kidding. Just kidding.
That's fair.
Not really. I'm not kidding, but you're right.
They would. But
because our political system is aligned towards profit. It's not aligned towards the human condition or the welfare of animals. It's completely aligned towards power and profit. And, and that is a broken and corrupt system.
Yeah. And human supremacy.
All right. So here's a quote that I want to read. This is I'm going to read you this quote by a very distinguished social scientist in the University of Pennsylvania. Right. And I was actually listening to this in the gym. It's from a podcast. But this quote to me says it all. Okay.
Yeah.
And here it is. Here's what he says. This is Joe Simmons at the University of Pennsylvania. This is about an incentive system. And the incentive system is completely broken. And we need to get a new one. And the people in power who are reinforcing this incentive system, they need to not be in power anymore. This is illustrating. There's sort of a rot at the core of some of this stuff that we are doing. And we need to put the right people, the right values. We need those people to be in charge. Right? So you might be asking, like, what is he talking about? And interestingly, he's talking about science. Science. This is not a comment about politics. He's talking about science. And this is someone who is a scientist himself, who spent his entire life. He's an applied statistician in Pennsylvania, talking about how corrupt the basic incentives of science have become and why, 50% of studies cannot be replicated when you publish them. And it's because it's oriented around power and prestige and money and not around truth and value and goodness. Yeah. Right. And if science, which is, if anything, especially elite levels of science from these extremely distinguished institutions like Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania and these Ivy League universities, if even that system is rotten at the core, and this is the way he's describing it, how much hope do we have the rest of society? And again, part of it, and I'd say not just part of it, essential to the rot at the core of science, of politics, of our economy, is the fact that it's not oriented around the values that actually matter. It's oriented around things like profit. It's oriented around things like power.
Yeah.
And we have to fundamentally change that.
Well, that was
eerily, what's your reaction to that quote?
I loved it, and it was eerily appropriate to what I wanted, a point I wanted to make, which is that, you know, like, and I can speak from this personally, like when I'm trying to do something, like for instance, you know, I was trying to learn Chinese. Well, for a long time when I was trying to learn, I just didn't like, I had my roommate at the time who was Chinese, but you know, there wasn't enough around me to be able to, like, when I completed my lessons or whatever, I learned like so many words that there was like a reward for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like people need like a positive reinforcement. And so I think that's one thing. Like, I think what's happening, these guys, is that they anytime they do something good, because they're so isolated and nobody wants to be around them, they don't get the rewards that they feel they should have got, like the date or something. And you know, like in our lives, change is hard. Like I look back at moments that I've made big changes as eventful times in my life, you know? So we know that change is difficult. So one point is that when people feel despair, it's hard to get out of that. Despair breeds more despair. Violence breeds more violence. It's hard to get out of a cycle. So when these guys feel isolated and they start to just sink deeper and deeper and deeper without any dog to pull them out of it or something, then it can very quickly, as we see, go down to a very dangerous place. So I think that's one of the things, is that things snowball really quickly, and you have to be mindful of that. And so you know, if things aren't going well, like, you got to snap out of it fast and try to change course. But I love the quote, and I think it's very accurate of who we have in power, especially now. It's true of the Democrats, but I think we're in a very dangerous time. And, you know, that's kind of when I talked about it could be us. That's kind of why I've been so passionately, almost like when we had these discussions, pleading with you, don't do anything to empower this guy, because this could be us. You know, we can become Nazi Germany. We can become all of that. It's not that far away from who we are as a people, because good people do bad things. I don't know. That was my point.
Yeah. So I forgot to mention that the guy I just quoted is Joe Simmons, who's a professor of applied statistics at the University of Pennsylvania. He teaches judgment and decision making there, and is also a member of the Data Colada Collective. I pulled this quote from the most recent episode of Freakonomics, which you can check out. It's the episode's title is "Can Academic Fraud Be Stopped?" It's fascinating about kind of the corruption even within an institution that you like to think has integrity, and it's a fascinating episode about how much corruption there is in academia.
The
corruption in academia is the corruption of all our systems, and fundamentally, the only way we can maintain integrity is by ensuring that even in hard cases, the system holds up and is doing the right thing, then we know it's probably doing okay. But if in hard cases it's failing miserably, and it's, you know, and by hard cases I mean basically cases where the point of democracy and the rule of law, for example, is not that it protects the powerful. I mean, of course it protects the powerful. Every system protects the powerful. We don't need to protect the powerful, you know. I mean, with some exceptions, like you have occasional exceptions like the Cultural Revolution, where there's an inversion in the power structure where the powerful become targeted, and because there's a revolution, or, you know, the French Revolution when Robespierre and all the radicals in the French Revolution decided to say off with their heads and started killing all the elites, the aristocracy, and eventually the bourgeoisie too. But with those exceptions, I mean, basically every system in American history, in global history, has always protected the powerful. So the real test of whether a system is functioning, whether it has that rot or not, is whether it's protecting vulnerable people.
Yeah.
And
And
right now we're failing
academia,
that test miserably.
we're failing it massively. My family is a really highly educated family. So I grew up like really believing in academics,
Hmm.
or at least like that I should, and that, very science based and everything. And I just made this point on my channel the other day because I was watching this guy, Kane Defends Animals. He's an activist. He did like a very Gary Yourofsky style speech at this university. And I was thinking, like, when I went to school, did I ever have something like that happen? Did I ever have Gary Yourofsky or Kane Defends Animals come and visit my college? No.
Hmm.
And I wonder, you went to college, I know. Did they test animals at your university? Tests
Yeah,
on
for sure.
animals? I bet they
The
did.
University of Chicago. Yeah. I don't know
Yeah.
about DePaul, but the University of Chicago for sure. There's a huge amount of animal testing.
Yeah.
It's
So,
sick.
I mean, just a horrific thing happening under our watch that we don't think about that much. I remember I dated a woman who was going to get her degree. Maybe I shouldn't. Anyway, she was at UNC Chapel Hill when I was dating her,
Hmm.
and she was studying the effects of cocaine on rats. I remember going into the lab
Yeah,
and seeing the rats with the stuff
yeah,
attached to their head. We
sure.
don't need to get into it, but it didn't even register for me because I had no
Wow.
education in animal rights. That this is like, wow, like I probably thought, oh, like that must suck, something like that. But it didn't strike me as horrifically wrong. I mean, we even had a conversation, me and her, fairly recently about that, where we were like, her mind was blown that I had gone
Hmm.
vegan because we were like eating steak and stuff back in the
Yeah.
day. So anyway, but
That is such a great example, an important example, though, of how context shapes everything.
mm,
Because it's kind of like these movies where you can have like a horror movie where it's just an everyday scene, like you're walking down the grocery store aisle, but the music is disturbing and insidious, and
yeah,
it's kind of scary. It's like, oh shit, what's going to happen? Like the context shapes your perception of the events, and you can have like a very disturbing scene, like literally, neural probes being inserted into an animal's head, who's in agony and trapped in a cage. But everyone's like, oh, everything's fine. The authority figures say it's fine. This is just a normal institution. It's UNC Chapel Hill, very distinguished university. Don't worry, everything's fine. And you don't even do a double take because the context is telling you this is fine.
right.
And this is part of the reason why I think it's important to have this conversation about violence and why violence happens. Is because the context of these violent episodes is so off to me. It's a lot of it is about, oh, what was wrong with this guy, or what was wrong with this particular ideology, like it's ISIS and extremists. And I'm not saying there isn't any explanatory value from those explanations. I think there is some explanatory value. There's probably something mentally wrong about this particular guy. There's certainly something wrong with ISIS, but there is a broader context that is being completely missed that shapes everything, right? And
Yeah,
that context is a society that is increasingly misaligned with the values that matter most. And the only way we can align this society with the values that matter most is to protect the most vulnerable, and that is animals. You
yeah,
know, that is, the
100%.
poor college kid who can't pay for his rent anymore because the student loans are too high. That is the mother of three who suddenly is diagnosed with breast cancer and goes bankrupt, which
Yeah,
the leading cause of bankruptcy in this country is medical bills. That is the 1 in 2 Americans now. 1 in 2 Americans who are rent burdened, right? 1 in 2, like the highest percentage of American history. Like
yeah,
half of them. I'm one of them. No one can afford rent anymore. There is something that is going off the rails in our society. And
off the rail.
again, the only way to ensure this all works, it's like, I call it the stress test, the moral stress test, because it shows like if we're strong in one area and we can be resilient in this one area that is basically predictive of how we'll do in all these other areas, then we can be satisfied that our system's actually working. And the place where we need to impose the most stress and improve our society's functioning, and where we've done the worst, because the living beings who suffered the most under the weight of this system is definitely the animals. We've
Yeah,
replaced all the animals of this earth, at least terrestrial animals, all the land animals of this earth, with animals trapped in cages being tortured in factory farms and labs. That was an article in Science magazine recently. It just showed how the shift in the biomass of the earth is astonishing in the last 100 years, where
yeah,
we have just wiped out all the animals of this and replaced them with factory farmed animals in cages.
yeah.
So all that's left on Earth is basically human beings and a bunch of animals in cages. That's sick. That is sick. That is like some weird dystopia. And that same system that has allowed all these sentient beings to suffer and be placed in cages is now insidiously encroaching on the human condition. It's going to affect us too, unless we stop it before it's too late. So I think this is an existential crisis.
Well, and a guy that drives his vehicle through a crowd might think that he's driving through a crowd of people who don't protect the vulnerable, you know, like,
and don't care about him for sure.
Right. Definitely don't care about him. So, I mean, it's interesting. We're talking about like protecting the vulnerable. I love that you had Kam on your channel recently, the Christspiracy director. Yeah, and that film was so
provocative. Dude is so smart. I knew there was a lot of interesting stuff in the documentary. I had no idea. This is guy like a PhD level biblical scholar.
He's brilliant. And
I know it's fun just talking.
I could kind of tell like from his film, like this guy's brilliant. I mean, just the way that he asked Kip that question at the beginning of the film. I bet you Kip, like he comes across as this surfer guy, you know, almost like I bet you he's brilliant too. But Kip
is smart. I've talked to Kip. Yeah. We're both real smart guys. Wait, say what the question is. It's because it's a great question.
What was I going to, the question.
Yeah. That Kam asked Kip, because you mentioned it, but you didn't say what it was.
Yeah. How would Jesus kill an animal?
Yeah.
Or is there an ethical way to kill? And it just gets to our point because we're talking about a guy who started to get into religious extremism. And this film makes the point that, I mean, like, I'm not a Christian, but, you know, the teachings of Jesus were like Jesus was supposed to be this guy who cared for the vulnerable. And the whole point of that film is to talk about how Jesus was probably someone who really cared for animals and didn't want this, you know, temple or whatever it was to slaughter animals. That may have led to his crucifixion. Is that how you say it? Crucifixion? I don't know. Whatever.
Crucifixion. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a wild documentary, and folks should go check out that episode if you're interested. But because Kam dives into a lot more detail, and honestly, like I even after watching the documentary, I wasn't as convinced as talking to him. After I talked to him, I was like, "Oh shit, you actually know your stuff really well. Like this is extremely well researched." Because every question I had, he had an answer, and he would elaborate on things even beyond the documentary in ways that were pretty shocking to me. That just showed how deeply researched this doc was, and yeah, I think I'm convinced that part of the reason, because I mean, his main point was that he made in our conversation was, look, the only thing that people bought and sold in temples back in Christ's time, 2,000 years ago, was animals. And that's true. The entire economy was basically agriculture. Even 100 years ago in the United States, like half of Americans lived on farms 100 years ago. And that was even more true 2,000 years ago. I mean, 100 years ago, at least the Industrial Revolution had already started, and there were other forms of economic production. But 2,000 years ago, basically the thing that, and the thing that people have traded probably for hundreds of thousands, not just thousands of years, but hundreds of thousands of years, since like men started hunting, and it was primarily men who hunted, was like animal products. Like that was considered the prized possession of the powerful. That's what gave you social stature and therefore power. And so inevitably, the thing they were selling and buying at the temple that Christ wanted to interrupt, it wasn't just about the commerce. It was about what the commerce was about. And the commerce was absolutely about animal slaughter. It was about selling dead animals in their products.
Yeah.
And so if he's disrupting the market, inevitably he's disrupting the slaughter of animals and the selling of animals.
And the authorities, the people with power and the money. And so we're talking about power and authorities. It can be religious institutions. It can be governments. It can be a judge in Sonoma County. It's just, but so, I mean, that gets to the point then, like, can anybody have power? Like, should anybody have power? Because
only you.
Yes. Thank you. All right.
We solved it. We've done it, everyone.
We've
achieved animal liberation and human liberation.
Well, nice chatting with you, Wayne.
Nice chatting with you.
I've got work to do.
Dictator for life. You've got work to do as the supreme being.
Well,
should I just start calling you the supreme one?
You absolutely can, and I require it. Actually,
all right, good. It's just a factual. It's not even really a position. It's just factual. You know. I'm
going to change my display name. I think y'all take those out anyway, don't you?
Nice.
Supreme one.
Do we take them out? I don't even remember. Shillow's the one.
I think Shiloh takes the individual recordings, so we don't have our name on there. I think I could be wrong. I'll change it.
All right.
You can make sure you title this episode "A Chat with the Supreme One."
Yeah. Okay. Let's do that. No, I'm serious. Let's take. I'm going to make the YouTube episode. whatever the titles, and we haven't decided on the title yet, but with Supreme One.
We can reuse your praying, and then I'll just be standing
Nice.
over you.
There we go.
Like, yeah.
Begging the Supreme One to save all the people and animals being killed.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were going to say something?
Well, I lost it when
I was going to say, you keep bringing up zone of interest. So one of the most insightful but also disturbing facts about human culture over the last couple of years is the popularity of the Joker movie. And so I say this even though I love Joaquin Phoenix and I actually love the movie in a lot of ways, which may say something bad about me, but that movie is super dark, right? Yeah. It's super dark, and it almost seems like it's justifying mass murder because the Joker. Okay, you don't want to be spoiled. Skip ahead a few seconds. Yeah, but the Joker in the original movie is a mass murderer, but he's kind of the hero, or at least he's the anti-hero or the villain that you have like weird sympathy for. And it's so weird because so often people like trying to dive into someone's history when there's a mass killing. They try and figure out what the ideology is. They try and figure out, what mental health support this guy responded to. And it's really the Joker movie. Okay, first of all, I think it's a wonderful diagnosis as to what causes mass murder. It's like a deeply isolated man.
Yeah.
Deeply isolated man. But the second and the disturbing thing, this is why I said it's disturbing that it was the most popular movie in America and I think at the time was the first R-rated movie in American history that exceeded $1 billion in sales. So worldwide, not just in the United States, around the world. And it was popular around the world. Is that part of the reason it's popular is because people empathized with the Joker. They understood where it was coming from.
Yeah.
And have you seen this clip? Have you seen the movie?
Yeah, I saw Joker, and I tried to watch the sequel, which was panned for being terrible.
Yeah. So what do you mean you tried? You didn't actually see it?
I had it on, but I was focused on the little guy. Yeah.
I watched the beginning, and it seemed really boring. The beginning was like, I forget what it was. It was like some campy, do you remember what it was? It was like some campy beginning that didn't make any sense. Yeah, it was a cartoon or something like that.
Yeah,
it seemed really silly. But there's this line from the original Joker movie where he's being interviewed by this television host the TV host who's like a Johnny Carson, David Letterman,
De Niro,
Jimmy Kimmel type. Yeah, it's what's that?
Life. I think it was De Niro, wasn't it? Robert De Niro?
Yeah, Robert De Niro is the actor, but he's playing like a Johnny Carson, Jimmy Kimmel type or Jimmy Fallon type. He's like hosting a late night show. And previously he had played a clip of the Joker on his show just to make fun of him because he's like a terrible kid. I mean, he's a loser. He's repulsive. He's like someone you laugh at and you mock. It's so absurd and so worthy of contempt that he actually invites the Joker character on the show for an interview. And he doesn't realize this guy has gone off the deep end and is now like a mass murderer. Yeah. He goes on the show, and at the climax of the movie, and again, this is a spoiler, so fast forward like 30 seconds if you don't want to hear this. The climax of the movie is when the Joker on national television admits, I'm the one who killed those guys. I murdered 3 men on a subway station, and they deserved it. And then there's a clip, and I think did I share this clip with you? I'll share it with you now.
No, I mean I've seen it.
Yeah, well, just watch this clip. This is like the moment in the.
So we're not going to show this, okay?
We'll show it, but let's watch it real quick, and I'll play it real quick.
How about another joke, Murray?
No, I think we've had enough of your jokes.
What do you get?
I don't think so.
When you cross a mentally ill loner with a society that abandons him and treats him like trash.
Call the police,
I'll tell you what you get.
Call the police.
You get what you fucking deserve.
Do you remember watching that scene?
I remember the outcome. I didn't remember the quotes. Like, what do? You call the police, which is an interesting quote because, we know what happens when we call the police.
Yeah. Well, he says, someone call the police, but the Joker character says, what do you get when you mix a lonely man or something like that, a lonely man with mental health issues with society that doesn't give a damn about him and that treats him like shit? What do you get? You get what you fucking deserve. And then he shoots the guy. And it really is that simple. When you have when you have, and I think the reason this resonated with so many Americans is because they felt that way themselves. They felt like, and I think obviously, hopefully most people are not going to resort to using violence, but there are a lot of people out there of all stripes, of all races, all religions, all ethnicities, all genders, who feel this deep sense of being unwanted, of having a system around them. Like, I'm just blown away by, like, whenever you look at the data on how much people are just like hanging out with each other, I think it's 15% of Americans say they have no friends at all. Like,
Wow.
1 in 6 Americans are saying they have no friends, something like that. Or maybe it's no close friends, but it's like a shockingly disconnected society. And, it's video games, it's the decline of religion, it's all sorts of things. It's like reduction in romantic and family and even sexual activity. I mean, everything's declining, other than like the things you can do at home by yourself are all increasing. Video games, drugs, drinking, all these like extremely destructive, isolated behaviors are increasing.
Yeah.
While like just feeling wanted, having people to hang out with who like you and enjoy your company, that's like decreasing. And inevitably, and this is a context that matters. Like it's not about ISIS. It's not about this specific guy's situation. It's about this broader societal trend that is sending us hurtling down the path towards violence. I mean, it's inevitable if we continue down this path.
Interestingly, and this will be a little bit of self-promotion, but I've been doing my own YouTube channel, and recently I started getting into doing live streams. And I've even done gaming streams. But I can tell you that it's interesting because I'm doing these sort of isolated activities, like, for instance, playing a video game, but I'm doing it kind of for the purpose of building this community because people can interact with me. And I'll tell you, my channel is very small. And so there have been times when I've done a stream where there's like nobody in the chat. And it definitely affects the stream. It affects my mood. Like when there's someone in the chat hanging out, chatting, I'm like, let's keep doing this. It's fun, And so it's interesting.
And
so
probably the threshold that matters is 1. I'm guessing that it's one person. Yeah.
It literally is 1, because the first time I streamed, I played this game, Alien Isolation. It's a torturous, stressful video game. One guy in the chat, shout out Pebble. Thank you, Pebble.
Thank you, Pebble.
Yes.
You're amazing.
You're amazing, Pebble.
The Supreme One would like to acknowledge your value
Supreme
to the
One
world.
is acknowledged. Pebble in your shoe. Pebble in my shoe.
Nice.
Anyway, he was hanging out with me the whole time, like laughing, when I would die, and strategizing how do we get past this alien. And it was fun. It was like, and that was a little bit of connection across, wherever Pebble is. And so I mean, but the risk in when we have these guys is that some of their connections become people who are extremist of some sort, and law enforcement thinks it's us, but it's not us. We're the good guys.
That's such a good point. What if your one person is an ISIS extremist?
Yeah, exactly.
What's going to happen to you if you have one person and it's someone who thinks you should murder people, right? That's
Thank
scary.
you, Pebble, for not indoctrinating.
You saved the Supreme One, Pebble, by not being an ISIS extremist. Well, here's the other thing. You know who is never going to be an ISIS extremist?
An animal rights activist? A dog. Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Yeah.
You brought it back.
If everybody had, I mean, I trust dogs more than I trust any human being on the planet Earth.
Definitely.
Like, and even when dogs commit acts of violence, like, it's not ideological. It's like an instinctive, out of control thing. I know this better than anyone because I had a very aggressive, violent dog for many years. Lisa,
you blogged about, which was a beautiful blog, by the way.
Yeah. Well, but I also think, I mean, the power of one person who's just kind to you and like one animal who's kind to you, like certainly my experience with Vivian, my first dog growing up, was transformative for me. I mean, I was on the path towards just very, very bad outcomes when I was a kid and in high school. And I will say one human makes a big difference too, because when I was in high school, I had so few friends, right? I just relentlessly bullied. And honestly, like I was on a very bad path early in high school, even before, I think this and a lot of our audience know this, but I actually had to leave high school because I got my face sliced open, got attacked.
Yeah.
And ultimately went to college early. But one of the reasons, I honestly think one of the reasons that I didn't kill myself or do something much worse to somebody else, because I was getting in fights and I really wanted to hurt people because I was just angry all the time. And I was just constantly being bullied, and I'd been bullied for so many years. You know, there's a part of you that just wants vengeance at that point.
Right.
There was one girl. She was like a popular and pretty girl.
Hmm.
And I have no idea why she took an interest in me. I don't think she liked me. I think she was just like a good person who just pitied me. She pitied me so much that one time, and she didn't even do that much for me, but like there was one time I was sitting in the hallway because I'd gotten in trouble, and like I got kicked in the hallway and I had to sit out in the hallway. I think it was like in 9th grade, or maybe it was in 8th grade. I forget. But this woman, Allie, she comes walking by, and this might sound kind of insulting, but it wasn't. Like the way she said this was very caring and authentic. She said, she like came by and just like looked at me for a moment, and she just said, "Wayne, I think you should have friends."
Wow.
And it wasn't, and it's like at first that might sound mean, like, but
Yeah.
it wasn't. It was like clear by her voice and her tone and just the way she was looking at me. She was like, "Wayne, I think you need to have friends." And I was like sitting there like, but she was totally right. She said, and I said, "What?" And I said something like, "What do you care about me? What do you know? You don't know anything." Or I might have even said, "I have friends," which wasn't true. I didn't have
And you
friends.
could have
Or at least-
said, "You want like be my friend, Allie, and you want to go on a date?"
I wanted her to be my friend. I would have loved. I mean, she was like beautiful and like a cheerleader, and she was like, I mean, that was so outside of the realm of possibility. That was like, I might as well ask Taylor Swift out on a date when I was 13, or I asked Taylor Swift on a date now. I mean, it's ridiculous. But just her saying that, and we had like a short conversation, and I just kind of a tiny bit got to share a little bit of my experience and had someone listen to me. But just the fact that someone cared enough to say like, "I wish you had friends, I want you to feel happy and loved and cared for and accepted," like made a huge difference to me. Cause I remember every day from that day on, like I had this like slight spring in my step. I was like, "Oh, Allie thinks I should have friends. This is great. At least one person knows I exist." It like made a big difference for me.
Yeah.
And it can be a little scary too, because, and I've had this experience too, where, I like try to be that person for a lot of people too. And, it's led to some really bad outcomes for me. And this is why I think a lot of people don't do nice things, because like maybe you do something nice and someone becomes fixated on you, right? And it becomes dangerous. They don't realize, look, I hope you have friends, but I'm not going to date you, or I don't want to hang out with you that much, or I'm not going to give you money, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So, and I've had that experience of just trying to be generous and nice to someone, and then like having it turn into this like weird twisted thing where they're obsessed with you and like, following you around and like doing scary shit. And obviously as like a guy, and I feel pretty safe, but for women, obviously that's a lot more dangerous. But yeah, it's such a hard question. But if we could create a society that systematically encourages and supports people and just connect with one another and connect with animals. And this is another reason dogs and cats are great, because like, again, not that dogs and cats can't be threatened, and we have to be careful about placing dogs and cats in situations of unstable human beings.
Right.
But there's so much evidence that having a positive relationship with animals can create a more positive relationship with human beings too.
Yeah.
So why don't we just invest more in that?
We should.
Instead of killing them and roasting them alive and eating them.
Right. Which just, encourages more and more and more violence. And like, I appreciate you telling me that. Such a personal story. I thought I'd heard all your stories. I hadn't heard that one. And it reminded me of me too. Cause when I grew up in high school, I was a loner too. And luckily I hit that threshold where I had like one good friend. But I remember I was not confident with girls. And it's funny, we were talking about the military. I did want to mention earlier, actually. So when I was in high school, I was in a JROTC.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
an Air Force JROTC that they had at my high school.
You?
Yeah. And I was like pretty good. Like the instructors saw things in me, Wayne. They saw leadership in me. Anyway, I did want to say, like we were talking about.
Wait, you're such a rebel, though. I can't imagine you
in the
military authority structure.
Yeah. I didn't like wearing
I can imagine you like being there for 5 seconds and just saying like, "I'm out."
I mean, I almost I had to wear a uniform on Tuesdays. I think it was Tuesdays. And I got a ride from my neighbor buddy who was a little older, and he just laughed his ass off when he saw me in that suit
uniform
thing. But anyway, I did want to say, because we were talking about the military, and I'm from a military state. There are really good people in the military, and those instructors, I thought were like some of the most high quality people I've met. And
Really?
yeah, they like gave me like really good advice. And you know what? One of the instructors was saying this. I just remember this. Like he was saying, like, you're too skinny. You need to eat some beans. And
Really?
like,
And he said
yeah,
beans and not meat.
right. He was like, you need to eat
Wow.
beans. Isn't that
Was this
wild?
dude vegan?
I don't know. I don't know.
Huh.
But I was
You
just gonna
should find him
say,
out. Find out if he's vegan. You should go back. Do you
I don't
remember the guy's name?
Like, I don't remember the guy. He was
It's too
he was a
bad.
tall, thin guy. But yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I
Well,
was
it's him
at
in the
like
U.S. food pyramid.
yeah. I was at
They just
the
announced they're promoting beans. Yeah.
oh that good.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody will just ignore it though. Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
I was at a military ball though for that
Mhm.
thing, and it was the first time I ever danced with a girl, and it was
Wow.
similar to your.
So how old are you in this? This is like late teens?
I was like 13, 14, 15.
Okay.
You know.
Okay. So this is like very junior ROTC.
Yeah, because it was I went to one high school for 2 years and a different one. It was the first high school I went to, and yeah, and I just remember that girl. Like it's kind of like your situation with Allie. I remember her coming up to me and wanting to dance, and I was just like, really, this pretty girl wants to dance with me, and it was just like one little dance, and that was the end of it. But that did change for me like a lot about how I felt about myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean. That's just me talking about myself. That's not really good.
How did you tolerate the military? You're such like I feel like you don't like authority and.
Yeah, I don't like authority. Yeah, you know that about me.
I know.
Well, it was just a class that you had to go to.
Okay.
And, you know, I at one point when I grew up, I was like a fan of Top Gun and stuff. I thought that was really cool. So there was a point where I thought I could see myself going into the military to be a maverick.
But
you know,
I mean, yeah, I mean, the real military is like the opposite of mavericks. It's like
it is.
You follow the rules.
Follow the rules. Yeah.
So, did you find it fun, or how did you? I'm just trying to like imagine what 13 or 14-year-old Jeremy was like. Maybe you're just a very different person. You're okay with just like listening to some douchebag who's telling you what to do.
Because my one friend at that time was the guy that I was listening to Alice in Chains and you know. Smoking weed with and doing all this stuff, you know, like
wow.
So
while you were also in the military,
yeah, I was a rebel.
And back then, it was not okay to smoke weed if you're in the military, right?
Probably not. Yeah, and you know, I didn't do a lot as a kid and drug experimentation wise, but with my buddy, we did more than weed, and so I was definitely like I gravitated more towards that side of things than like military. But
is this your buddy in the Bay Area? Can you say who it was?
Oh, it wasn't Allman, no, my buddy.
Okay. All right. I was going to say, I was like, wow, an Asian dude was smoking weed with you in the 1990s?
Yeah. I can't, like...
Because Asian dudes don't do... I mean, I guess nowadays they probably do. But when I was growing up, all the Asian kids are like...
I don't know if I should have said...
rule followers.
It's fine. Alan. Yeah, it's fine. But, yeah, no, Alan was like a good kid. He was like your typical Chinese kid. Played piano, good in school. Yeah.
Nice.
Very religious, very Christian. I think still to this day. Anyway, I shouldn't really be doxing Alan, but they don't know his last name.
I didn't say his last name. No one will find him. Yeah, you know, interesting. One connection between the guy who blew up the Tesla truck and the guy who murdered all those people in New Orleans is they're both in the military. And I think they were both at Fort Bragg in North Carolina.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Yeah. Yeah.
And there's something about that the fact that there's so many, and these aren't the only guys. There have been a lot of ex-military guys who've gone on. And like, there's the obvious connection between the military and these episodes of mass violence, namely, you know, if you know how to use guns and explosives and that sort of thing, you can kill others. But I also think the military is an example of like this very rigid system that is clearly misaligned with human well-being, that people start realizing not just by the actions of the military itself, and the military in the United States has committed all sorts of atrocities. I mean, literally, I think it's hundreds of thousands of Iraqis died based on a war that was completely fabricated. And it's just, there still is really no accountability for that. In fact, the only accountability that's happened is basically for the people who exposed it. People like Edward Snowden and Julian Assange have been in prison and targeted and like have to run from the country, you know, and the people who actually did the deed, you know, are still in power. They're still super rich and they made a killing off of it.
Yeah.
So there's that, but there's also the military like most of the systems operating our society, is a structure that really defers to power and wealth.
Yeah.
And doesn't actually protect the vulnerable. And I think a lot of these people get caught up in the military. They believe the nonsense that they're told, which is, oh, we're about defending the Constitution. We protect the rule of law. We defend human rights in the U.S. military. And then, there's a helicopter that shoots up a bunch of kids in a van and you cover it up. Or there's an American missile strike that shoots an aid worker and his family, and you claim they're terrorists. And this, like, you learn these things and you realize, oh shit, this could happen to me too. I mean, the military is just railroading these completely vulnerable people who we say we're helping, and it's not being accountable to its values. And I think it's one of the reasons people break, because they're part of this very rigid system that is dependent on the idea that the rigid system is devoted to something that's worth it, that the ends justify the means.
Yeah.
And they realize, no, this is all just a power game. It's all about killing and wealth and influence and status and power. And so I'm going to play by their rules and just start killing too.
Yeah. I don't know if this is going to be informative to the discussion or not, but I think it might be. So a little bit about North Carolina. You mentioned Fort Bragg and Camp Lejeune. Those are the two big, pretty much. I think Camp Lejeune got renamed. Fort Bragg did too. Fort Liberty
It's
now.
like Fort Liberty now.
Yeah. But anyway, they're in Fayetteville and Jacksonville, North Carolina, which are in eastern North Carolina, which is also where they have all the pig farms. So that's where the hog industry is, one of the largest areas of the hog industry in America, including the largest slaughterhouse at one point, the Tar Heel, North Carolina plant. So that's interesting. And so the military bases are around this like sort of mass of around animal exploitation. I also would call Wilmington, where I went to college, the most dangerous place that I've ever lived, which is interesting because it's just like this beach town. You wouldn't think that, but it's also like one of the highest rates of like heroin use. It's also got, so it had this hodgepodge of like, you'd have like drunk college kids downtown. You'd have the Marines from Camp Lejeune coming down. And then you had the Black community, which was like very impoverished and like a massive amount of gang violence in that. All of those mixing
and a lot
together.
of factory farms out near Wilmington too, right?
That's right. That's right. Which I didn't know at the time, but surrounding Wilmington, that's in Brunswick County, I believe. And yeah, because we did like a tour of like some of that stuff way back in the day, and we were doing it. We were staying in Wilmington at the time. So all this stuff surrounds Wilmington by like an hour or so. And yeah, I know you've been there. You did. I know you and James Aspie did your activism there in North Carolina and Eastern North Carolina. You've done so much. You probably don't remember every place you've gone to, but you were there. And yeah, I would have been there actually with y'all if it had happened a little later.
Maybe we should do it again.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. I mean, it's a huge industry. And it's been the subject of films. The Smell of Money documentary was made about it. I know Kip did a segment in What the Health about it. So, yeah, but yeah, I don't know if that informs our discussion or not. But I mean, definitely like people who start following the rules blindly. I mean, that's what we do in terms of like where, like a lot of people will say like, oh, you rescued that chicken. Well, you should have followed the law. You've been on trial for that, went to jail. Zoe's going to be on trial. People are going to be telling Zoe, you broke the law. You broke the law, Zoe. Face the consequences. The law does not, as you mentioned, protect the vulnerable.
Yeah. If you do the crime, then do the time.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the people who say that, you look at places like Wilmington where crimes against animals are highly correlated with crimes against human beings. If it actually were the case that we were serious about stopping crime, then frankly, the first place we should go is the places where animals are being abused. Because in terms of the number of crimes being committed against victims, there's no question that factory farming, even if you just looked at one industry like chickens or cows or pigs, just one of them, because each separate offense, each separate infliction of suffering, neglect, torture, cruelty, confinement is a separate crime in every state that I've looked at. So when you cage a single chicken and leave her in a position where she is forced to cannibalize other chickens, that is a crime. You did your 200,000 chickens as they do at Sunrise Farms in Sonoma County. That's 200,000 criminal offenses for each animal.
Look at this shirt. I just want to point that out. This is a cool
what's
shirt.
it say?
Actual size of a hen
Size of-
cage.
Yeah, that's sick.
Yeah. That's
Pretty
crazy.
sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a crime, right?
Yeah. I will say that's probably not actually the size of a hen cage. But
Oh, yeah. Well,
yeah, I mean, battery cages are bigger than that. That is probably about the size. That's the amount of space that one hen gets in a cage.
yeah.
But even battery cages, typically, they'll be like anywhere from minimum 70 square inches to 144, 116 square inches.
Yeah, we've
So
seen
that's
that.
probably like 12 by 12, which is 144. So, and they'll usually have, I mean, it depends on the size of the cage. Sorry, I'm geeking out a little bit, but.
And you're calling out my clothes, I
Well,
thought it was really cool.
Like, I think I would hate for like a farmer to watch this and say like, oh, these guys are idiots. They don't know what they're talking, like, because I've actually been in these facilities a lot. I've studied it a lot, and it's unlikely. I mean, I'm sure there are cages that small, but most even battery cage facilities will be bigger than that. They'll be more like, 8 square feet, not 1 square foot. And that's not 8 square feet. Like 8 square feet would be like a 4x4 box. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like a battery cage is more like a large filing cabinet size,
and you have a massive amount of footage that you've taken from these places.
I do. And I've seen in a lot of battery cages, and they're bigger than that. But you're right. It's like, it's disturbing that we can treat animals like this. And, and again, in most states like California, in fact, I'd say in all states, because I made this argument, I think in my last podcast. I know it was a podcast I did with somebody else. But there's a higher law, even if it weren't the law of the land that's written on pieces of paper, that animals must be treated with dignity.
It was with me.
There's a higher law that exists,
Or you've made that point with me before. I remember that. It really stayed with me because I asked you, I was talking about your whole like airport going through the turnstile thing. And I was like, well, how does a guy who follows all the rules in an airport go on to break some of these rules? He said, well, there's a higher law, and like that's, we were talking about Christspiracy, like some of these people, like, they follow a higher law. So interestingly, kind of tying this back to the Islamic State guy, he probably thought he was following some perverted higher law. And
well, who almost certainly was following a perverted higher law?
What's that?
Luigi Mangione.
Oh yeah, I thought maybe we should talk about Luigi. Yeah,
because he was a supporter of mine.
Yeah, he was, interestingly,
like a pretty big supporter. Apparently, I think it was Paul who posted this online. I can't contact Paul for the record because he's a co-defendant, and I'm not supposed to contact. But I think he posted on Twitter that Luigi Mangione came on Twitter, I think shortly before the Smithfield trial, and I think I was his first follow. That's literally the first person he followed on Twitter.
That is wild.
This is the guy who killed the United Healthcare CEO, for those of you who don't know.
Yeah.
His name's Luigi Mangione.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just crazy. And by the way, I just like, while we're talking about that, I have seen people like, even when I've been doing live stream, it's not to call anybody out, but I have seen people like suggest things like maybe if we took out a CEO of some animal industry, like, guys, that's not the way. In my opinion,
it's a complete misdiagnosis of the problem.
It is, the CEO. So anyway, but we should point out, it's interesting that Luigi followed you, but he got caught in a McDonald's. Isn't that interesting? I mean, he was running from the law though.
And he was eating a hash brown, which is not even vegetarian at McDonald's.
Is that right? Oh my goodness.
Because people, apparently he was also promoting cultivated meat on his Twitter. Have you saw this? Yeah, he was like a big fan of plant-based meats and cultivated
Twitter,
meats.
by the way. Make your blue sky count. I'm off.
I'm sorry. Sorry, I don't hate Elon enough. But yeah, he was. So there was a lot of people were wondering if he was vegan. And I mean, maybe he was. Maybe he just ate hash browns from McDonald's. But hash browns aren't even vegetarian. They have some sort of beef fat in them.
Yeah.
And maybe he was just like a lazy vegan. I don't know. But he was definitely. Yeah, it's scary because I think a lot of people who see the truth about the world do resort to violence. And so there's so many things wrong with that. One is it's a misdiagnosis of the problem, right? It's not just bad CEOs, it's bad systems. And killing the CEOs is not going to fix the system. Second is it's profoundly unethical. It's wrong to kill. It's treating this other living sentient being as a means to your end. And this is why, for the record, I'm also against the Ukraine war. my friend. I love getting those digs in with you. I'm sorry. I know it's different. That's totally unfair because it's
Well,
different context.
yeah, I
But-
mean, we could have that
but the-
discussion.
Yeah.
I mean,
no,
we won't, but yeah.
Yeah. But the worst thing about it is completely hypocritical to use violence and counterproductive, because if you're concerned about causing suffering and death to people, and your response to that is to cause death to someone unnecessarily, right? Because this Luigi guy, from everything I've read about him, I mean, he seemed to have like genuine, legitimate concerns about a healthcare system. Like he had very serious back pain. It sounds like maybe he wasn't getting covered properly, you know? And on the bullets, it said like, I think deny, delay, depose, or something like that.
Right.
But if your response to that is to do exactly to the other people who you think are causing this suffering to you, what they have caused to you, if you do to them what they did to you, an eye for the eye makes the entire world blind. And it is probably done more to make the health industry, the health insurance industry, sympathetic than anything anyone has done over the last 40 years. Like if you wanted to make the healthcare industry and the health insurance industry look good, then take out one of their CEOs in an act of violence. And suddenly everyone's scared to criticize them because they think, oh my gosh, this is not the right time. You know, like whatever you think about, you know, what they're doing that's wrong, it doesn't justify violence. And that's true. And so you completely undermine the effort to try. And if I could talk to Luigi, and I've thought about even writing to him, because again, he was a supporter of mine. So I think he'd probably listen to what I have to say. But I've thought about writing to him and just, I mean, obviously trying to understand his perspective too. But at the end of the day, there's a line we cannot cross, not just for ethical reasons, but because it violates the values we espouse when we use acts of violence to hurt others.
Well, it might be interesting to write that letter. At this point, you know, he's probably going to be locked up for life anyway. I would imagine. I don't want to,
if not executed.
Yeah, if not. It's interesting.
Him and Sam Bankman-Fried, those are the two people I want to write to.
Yeah, you should.
But they're very different cases, because I think Sam Bankman-Fried, I'm going to go on a limb and say, I don't even think he did anything morally wrong. I think he was irresponsible. So that's a moral error, but it's kind of similar to someone reckless driving or something like that, which, you know, is wrong and can lead to harm, but it wasn't intentional misconduct for Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, you can make the argument that Luigi wasn't trying to engage in intentional misconduct either, because he thought he was trying to help people by killing the CEO, you know?
Yeah. Well, the Joker movie was an interesting, like, we're coming full circle here, because one of the interesting things about that movie, another spoiler, skip ahead 30 seconds, at one point towards the end of the film, he basically becomes like a folk hero. And isn't it interesting to see, like, I'm sure you've seen it online, how many people are just like praising Luigi. Yeah, celebrating him. There's been this meme that's going around where everybody's posting, thanks to our you know, employee Luigi, who worked from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. I've seen like 8 accounts do this thing. It just goes around like, thanks for working that day. And and because he's a good looking guy, I think that's why. And it's interesting, like, so we've idolized this guy. Like, imagine if this guy weren't attractive, like he wouldn't be getting.
He probably doesn't get the same support. I agree.
Right. And
isn't that sad about the state of the world?
He really is. Yeah. But yeah, it's just really interesting.
Well, it's good for people like you, because you're so, you know, you are the supreme one, Jermey. But
I'm the supreme.
The rest of us, the rest of us mere mortals, it's not looking good.
Yeah, I can't wait till you post this with the supreme one. I mean, that's gonna do wonders for my channel.
Nice.
Wait, where was I going? I was gonna make a point. Yeah, it's just I don't know, but
that he was beautiful and that it attracted all this superficial attention just because he's a handsome guy.
Yeah.
Sorry, I should stop interrupting you.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I'll just ramble then.
Nice.
Some of those points, yeah. Like, so I just think it's really interesting. I mean, this guy committed murder. In cold blood, and he's being seen as a folk hero, and that just and look, rather than diagnosing the individual Luigi case, that speaks to everything that you're talking about, how people are so disenchanted with the healthcare system, with the insurance companies, because they aren't looking out for us. I mean, I can share this. I just had a fender bender and I damaged my vehicle a little bit. I didn't want to tell them about the damage on mine because I worry that they're going to raise my
insurance.
Yeah. And so like when
it's a predatory system, you know, these companies are all just getting out to screw you. And it's kind of hard to live in an environment like that where you have the most powerful institutions around you. Just like, I mean, predatory is the right word. It's like there's a bunch of these dangerous monsters out there trying to eat us. It's like if you're walking through the forest. I mean, that story you had about that one time you were walking through the mountains on a hike in the nighttime, and you just got a sense that there's a predator out there. I mean, that's not a good place to be in. That's kind of the way so many people feel about the entire world.
Right, and the way animals must feel at all times, which is like,
yeah, they're scared.
Which is like almost impossible.
And unlike us, they can't defend themselves. I mean, they've literally evolved to be defenseless. The dogs, the pigs, the cows, the chickens. I mean, these are defenseless creatures.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why that experience in the mountains for me, like just to briefly recap, I was in the woods in the dark and I felt completely defenseless. So I was hearing sounds around me. I thought I'm completely defenseless. Sort of predator. Yeah.
Because you can't even see. You can't even see where they are.
And I thought they were human, to be clear. I thought humans were after me.
Out there. I see.
Yeah. And it was
Did you hear about these two brothers who got killed by a 90-pound mountain lion?
No, I didn't.
The New York Times had a story about this. It's like, it's very rare. And, you know, I almost hate to bring it up because now people are going to go out there and think mountain lions are dangerous, and they're not. But it's pretty wild how rare it is. But this 90-pound mountain lion, you know, like ripped open this, and it's like two hunters. So it's like two pretty rugged, like 18, 19-year-old young men. They just saw a mountain lion like walking next to them. They're like, whoa, there's a mountain lion. And they just tried to like make themselves big and slowly walk away. Mountain lion pounced on one. The other brother intervened and tried to save him. Yeah. And the mountain lion went from grabbing one brother's face to grabbing the other's neck and then dragged him off.
Yeah.
And it's like a 90-pound mountain lion dragged off like a 170-pound guy and killed him.
Yeah. And I doubt anybody's saying, oh, it's just the circle of life, even though that's exactly.
No, they hunted down like dozens of mountain lions. They just basically exterminated them all.
Right.
Killed them, including all these mountain lions who had nothing to do with it. They just murdered them all.
Oh, in response. So they just went and killed
them. In response.
Of course they did.
Yeah, they just hunted down all these mountain lions. Yeah.
Which is.
And this poor mountain lion, this is like apparently, I don't know how they know this, but it was a 90-pound mountain lion. And that apparently means he was either very young or very emaciated. I mean, he was probably desperately hungry. He just needed something. And, you know, just happened to be the case that the something that came by was a human being. But
kind of an aside.
It's horribly sad.
Kind of an aside, but do you think if like Jaws hadn't come out and we had this fear of sharks, would we still kill sharks at the rate we did? Would the shark fin industry still? It would still exist. I guess we would be killing sharks, but
I think it'd be significantly smaller if not for Jaws.
Yeah,
I do think Jaws made it harder for people to sympathize with sharks because we think of them as monsters.
Right.
Yeah. So the title of the New York Times article, by the way, is "A Mountain Lion Attacked My Nephews. What Could Have Stopped It?" And it's about these two brothers, Talon and Wyatt, 21 and 18, who were attacked by mountain lions. Like apparently, I guess a couple months ago. I don't know
and they were hunters.
Oh, in March 2024.
Were they hunting?
They were just taking a hike, but they were hunters. You know, they hunt deer and turkey and quails and ducks. And it's just so weird how, like, you know, we hunt so many animals. We mercilessly hunt down so many animals, and we kill so many animals just out of just complete inconvenience. It's like, you know, you're annoying me, rat, so I'm going to poison you to death.
Yeah.
But whenever an animal takes out one of us, it's like all hell breaks loose and we have to exterminate them all. It's just, it just reminds me of human warfare too. It's like, I mean, sorry to bring it back to the Israeli-Palestine conflict, but this is true of both sides. It's true of the Russian-Ukraine war. It's true of all wars that like one of us dies and it's like all hell breaks loose, but we murder 1,000 of them and it doesn't matter. You know, it's like, wait a minute. I mean, what's the difference? Just, do you realize there are people just like you who are suffering when someone you love dies? Mm-hmm. Do you realize there are people just like you who have to come home every day to an empty bedroom and cry every night because the child they love more than anyone in the world is now gone because of a bomb, because of a drone, because of whatever it is. And I mean, the same is true of non-human animals. We don't recognize just how massive the impact is. Like, so this mountain lion that was hunted down, maybe he hunted these two kids or these two young men because she or he had babies who needed food and his children were starving to death and he didn't see any route other than killing these humans. And yet we hunt down not just him, but all the other mountain lions in the area because they killed two men, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty sick.
Well, one of the conversations that you had, I think you did this. I didn't watch it, but I know the story that you befriended the factory farm guy who prosecuted you, right?
Yeah.
Which I think, you know,
It's
what
the
we're
most recent
talking
episode.
about. Yeah, what we're
We posted
talking
on
about
Tuesday.
is basically like learning to love your quote unquote enemy.
Enemies.
You know,
Yeah.
and seeing the humanity in everybody. And so, yeah, when you're talking about whether it's Gaza or, you know, some war, or like I keep bringing up the zone of interest to remind myself, like, this could be us. It's also like a way of seeing the humanity in the enemy too, which I'm not saying go and be friends with Nazis, but, you know, it's just.
Well, I am. I think you should be friends with Nazis.
Well, it's a good point, actually. Yeah. I mean, bringing people in and trying to stop them from being Nazis, I guess. And, you know, to swing all the way back around to the guy who drove his vehicle through. I mean, if someone missed an opportunity, it's obviously no one individual's fault, but they may have missed an opportunity to bring this guy in and take him away from, you know, this dark side. Yeah.
Yeah.
If
we don't invest in friendship, we're not going to have friendship. If we don't invest in compassion, we won't have compassion. And if we invest in violence, we will get a whole lot more violence. And that's exactly what our society is doing. It's making massive, multi-billion-dollar investments in systematic violence. And you will reap what you sow. And I'm not saying that's what I want. Obviously, I think we don't want that. I wish it weren't the case that we reap what we sow, but we do. And you create a society built on violence, and there's going to be a lot of violence that comes back to haunt you.
And I mean, I kind of like to think of like the pandemics as nature's way of fighting back. We breed animals in this way. We're confining them in this way. We breed disease, and the disease comes back to bite us. Yeah. It's kind of karmic.
So listen to this podcast with this guy, Adam Frank. He's a cosmologist, I think, at the University of Rochester. And he writes about how the biosphere and I think it's I always forget how you pronounce it. I think it's GAIA. And I always forget if it's the Gaia Hypothesis or the Gaia Hypothesis. I think you can possibly pronounce it.
Gaia, maybe.
Gaia, maybe it's the Gaia Hypothesis. But it's this guy, James Lovelock, who's, I forget what James Lovelock's background is. Let me Google it real quick. Yeah. James Lovelock. But he came up with this thing called, he's, what is he? Yeah, the Gaia Hypothesis. He's a futurist. He's a PhD in the chemistry of disinfection. Wow. All right. That's interesting. I did not expect him to have a PhD in disinfection. Anyways, but he was a very famous scientist. He worked at NASA, and he came up with the Gaia Hypothesis. And the idea behind this is that the entire ecosystem has almost a life of its own, that it actually defends itself. And, that life as a whole, once it comes into existence and the connections between the life become like a synergistic and self-regulating system, that basically when you try to damage it, when you try and pull it away, like life wants to survive.
Right.
And it's even in things like producing oxygen, producing carbon dioxide when it needs it. Life creates the conditions of life because life wants to propagate itself. And in particular, the web of life as a whole wants to propagate the web of life. And so things that threaten the web of life ultimately are destroyed.
Yeah.
And that might be what's happening to human beings right now. That
could be.
The Gaia Hypothesis is kicking in, and the Earth as a biosphere is basically regulating its environment in a way that exterminates the threats. And right now, we are kind of the biggest threat to life on Earth.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, you can look at a human body too, like the human body and
like the immune system and temperature regulation, all the things we do.
Red blood cells and stuff, like all these non-sentient functions of your body that are defending the body.
Defending it, yeah.
We did not smoke weed before this podcast, by the way.
Yeah.
Just so that people know.
Or at least you didn't. Speak for yourself. I didn't smoke either. I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to get arrested for this.
You will.
All right, so we've been talking for a while. Big picture.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about why these younger men are killing people. What lessons do you think can be drawn from these episodes for all of us?
For all of us.
Like when you look at a situation like this Luigi guy, or, this guy, what's the New Orleans shooter's name again?
I don't remember. It was very hard to pronounce, I think, right? Wasn't it?
Yeah, I got it in just a sec. Shamsuddin Jabbar. So you look at Shamsuddin Jabbar's story, or Luigi's story, or I may even talk about the guy who blew up the Tesla truck, basically committed suicide, or this dude in New York City who pushed. Did you see the video footage of the guy who pushed someone into the subway tracks?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's disturbing. So what can we learn about this? What can we all do to stop this?
Well, we'll sort of recap some of the lessons that we've been over on that. One is that I think that we should remember that one that I kept coming back to. It could be us. It could happen to any of us if we don't take care of ourselves. And also that we need community. We need friends. For the animal rights movement, one of the things that we've obviously been doing with this is having great conversations and really trying to build community and build cooperation. So in the animal rights movement, as a lot of our listeners are part of, are going to feel isolated, and they need to find the community within this movement and outside of the movement too, for perspective. Another way is just kind of like be an ally, be one of those people, like if you see someone suffering a little bit, offer a word, because it makes a difference. Yeah. I remember walking down the street one time when I was feeling down, and some girl said to me, like, "Are you okay?" That was all she said. It was interesting. I must have looked like shit.
Yeah.
And that was just a nice thing to say, kind of like what Allie did. And so I think we try to pick each other up and help each other, but societally, we help the most vulnerable. It's right back to what we're trying to do and help the animals. And and in doing that, like, imagine if this guy, instead of wanting to, ram his car into somebody, instead he wanted to save animals. Like, I mean, you just find purpose. You and I were those people too, where we had like no purpose, and didn't know what we wanted to do with our lives. And we found purpose with the animals because they need us. It's like almost a blessing to have like some feeling of responsibility. And like I said, with that little pup, once you feel responsible for someone, then you really don't have time to go ram your car into people. I'm sorry to laugh at that. That's not funny.
No, but it's true. Yeah. And look, everybody can play that important role in creating a more compassionate place. And when you give compassion to the world, compassion comes back to you. And maybe you're not going to walk into a factory farm and do kind of some of the front lines work that you and I have been involved in defending or actually doing. Maybe you're not even going to be able to adopt a dog, but maybe what you can do is just retweet something about kindness to animals. Maybe it's donating to a sanctuary, giving $5 a month and passing on that cup of coffee and giving to a sanctuary like Happy Hand. So an animal can be saved, and it's going to make you feel so good afterwards when you
visit a sanctuary. For people who haven't been to one, go and hang out with a chicken. And I mean, I recommend that to everybody in and outside the movement. Just see what these animals are like. And but I mean, definitely there are a lot of dogs that need to be rescued. And I mean, 100%. Even just from the pound or whatever, so let's all follow what Wayne said. Let's all, like, maybe I need to get a dog. If you see me going off the rails, Wayne.
Yeah, I'll tell you to adopt a dog.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'll call you up and I'll come to North Carolina myself, brother. But
all right, appreciate you.
But in the long term, a dog would be helpful for all of us too. I think it's one of the best decisions I made. So all right, brother. Thank you so much for chatting as always. You want to just tell people about your show real quick so we can find your stuff?
Jermey Loeb, Loeb. That's my real name, and I have my own YouTube channel by that name. And I've been doing live streams. I do a lot of the interviews, like some of the same interviews that Wayne has been doing with some of the same people, and also some of the people that Wayne cannot talk to because he's been court ordered not to. People like Cassie King, Elmira Tanner, just wonderful people that would obviously have already been on Wayne's program because they're amazing people. It's a very similar thing. It's a spinoff from Wayne's channel. I'm doing my own kind of stuff too, but I hope you'll subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to grow it, and also these videos, and go check out the interviews on Wayne's channel that we've done already, like the Kam one. That was really provocative. And that's it. And stick together and try to lift up each other. That's
for sure. All right, so go subscribe, leave a comment on this episode or one of his episodes. It does. As Jeremy said, it does make a difference even to get one comment.
It does.
I know you read all your comments. I read all mine on YouTube too.
I do.
That don't respond.
My
So
my
it makes a
channel
difference.
is yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but my channel is so small that I can read literally every comment, and so I do, and I've gotten a lot of really sweet messages, and they do lift me up. So do the same for Wayne, because Wayne can also feel sometimes lonely in this battle. You know, even surrounded by people, it can be a very lonely fight, and Wayne needs that too.
Yeah, I do, and I will say things are a lot less lonely when Oliver's around, and then also Rose is amazing. I'm very, very lucky to have Rose in my life because maybe I should do an entire episode about what I think is the importance of relationships, meaning like romantic relationships and like partnerships. Because I think I've told you this before. I think it's like one of the most fundamental mistakes that young people make is like not trying to find a partner. And I'm super, super lucky to have the most amazing partner in the world. Rose is awesome.
Rose is amazing. And it's so funny because I literally just did this on my live stream because I was talking about Joey and Tyrion and Jack and Tash. And I was thinking about you and Rose, but I didn't know y'all were, open about it.
Oh, yeah. We're totally open about it.
Okay.
I mean, me, I don't give a shit. I mean, I've written my entire relationship history on the internet. Rose might not be okay with it, but I have cleared this of Rose. She's okay with me talking about it. I'm not getting in trouble.
I don't know Rose that well. I'd love to have her on my show because she's a badass.
Oh, you should. She's awesome. She's super cool.
Yeah.
The work she's done is
know
amazing.
If she's private about that kind of stuff. But anyway,
and
I'm real happy for you because I hope I'm not sharing. I know we're kind of running long on time, but when we first had that conversation in the car, we talked about relationships, and that was one of the things where I was like, God, I hope like when I come on board, I can at least free up some time for you to like kind of explore that in your life. You didn't have time for it. I totally failed you, but you did it on your own.
That's not true. That's not true. It was great having you on the team, and we've been working together on some big projects that should be coming out pretty soon. So stay tuned for that.
I'm excited.
Okay?
I'm excited.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, brother. Have a good time.
All right. Later.
Until next time. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We don't have to hurt animals. You can protect them. We don't have to kill them. We can care for them. And that's who we're meant to be, right? That's who we are when we're at our best. We're caring for each other and for the other living beings of this earth and not hurting them.